Scientists in Antarctica have now drilled into one of the Earth's oldest ice cores, penetrating nearly 3 kilometers to reach ice that they say is at least 1.2 million years old.
3 men stumbled out of the Antarctic blizzard with radiation badges burned completely black. They were supposed to be dead. The entire research station behind them had vanished, swallowed by melting ice and sealed over as if it never existed. But they carried something more dangerous than their lethal radiation exposure: a hard drive containing 47 seconds of footage that would be erased from the internet within hours of being uploaded. In that footage, you can see it: a massive metallic dome buried 2.5 miles beneath the ice. Ancient, perfectly engineered, impossible. And in the final frames, before the video cuts to static, you see something that makes your blood run cold. The dome is opening from the inside. China won't talk about what happened at Kunlun Station in 2018. The survivors have disappeared. The site has been sealed by military convoys. But the leaked files tell a different story. One about something that was contained beneath the ice for millions of years. Something that humanity was never meant to find. Something that's now awake. And here's what should terrify you. The last thing those scientists detected before the station collapsed was a signal. A beam of blue light shooting up through 2 miles of solid ice, punching through the atmosphere, reaching into space. It wasn't a distress call. It was a beacon. Whatever was in that dome wasn't asking for help. It was calling something home. And according to radio operators across the southern hemisphere, that signal is still repeating. Every 42 minutes, like a countdown that never stops. The question isn't what China found under the ice. The question is, what did they let out? The anomaly that shouldn't exist. In 2018, China decided they were done with surface-level research. They sent a heavily equipped team to Dome A, the most remote, most inhospitable point on the Antarctic continent. They built Kunlun Station directly on top of the thickest ice sheet in the world, over 2 miles of compressed glacial ice heavy enough to crush a submarine. Their official mission? Climate research? Studying ancient air bubbles trapped in ice cores, they said. Standard scientific work. But that wasn't the whole story. The equipment they brought told a different tale. Heavy-duty, ground-penetrating radar systems, the kind usually deployed to find oil deposits or hidden military bunkers. Technology designed to see through solid rock and detect the impossible. When they powered up that radar and aimed it downward, what came back on their screens made the entire team go silent. Natural geological formations look messy on radar. Rock scatters signals randomly, creating chaotic patterns. But this was different. The radar waves hit something deep beneath the ice and bounced back in a perfect, clean curve, the signature of something smooth, geometric, artificial. It was buried under 2.5 miles of solid ice. The sheer weight pressing down should have crushed anything flat, reduced it to powder over millions of years. But this structure was standing strong, intact, as if the crushing pressure meant nothing to it. The shape was unmistakable, a massive dome, roughly the size of a football stadium, hollowed out in the darkness beneath their feet. How can anything maintain structural integrity under that much weight? The scientists checked their equipment, convinced the brutal cold had damaged the sensors. They recalibrated everything and fired the radar again. Same result. They moved the equipment to different locations and scanned from multiple angles. Every scan showed the same thing: a perfect hollow dome, geometrically precise, hidden in the dark. But here's where it gets disturbing. As soon as the radar beam hit the object, the station's power grid flickered. Magnetic sensors across the camp spiked violently, then flatlined. Communications equipment crackled with interference. It was as if the structure knew it was being watched and was responding. The team leader, a geologist with 20 years of polar experience, stared at the data with growing dread. Nature doesn't create straight lines. It doesn't build perfect geometric domes deep underground. This was something else entirely. They designated it Anomaly G1 and sent the data to Beijing. The response came back within hours, marked with the highest security classification. Keep this quiet. The Americans and Russians cannot know what you found. The new orders were clear. Stop scanning. Start drilling. They were going to punch a hole straight down into the mystery, 2.5 miles through ice that behaves like concrete under pressure. And whatever was waiting down there, whatever had been sealed away for potentially millions of years, was about to be exposed to the surface world for the first time. But there was already a problem, one that should have been a warning they didn't heed. Drilling into the dark. The ice at that depth isn't like anything you've experienced. Under immense pressure, it transforms into something harder than concrete, denser than most rock. Drilling through it should have been slow, predictable, mechanical. But the deeper they went, the stranger things became. The drill bits were dulling faster than they should, wearing down as if cutting through something abrasive mixed in with the ice. The machinery groaned and sparked. Engineers reported unusual resistance patterns, moments where the drill would hit something harder than ice, then punch through into softer layers that shouldn't exist at those depths. And the temperature readings made no sense. At 2 miles down, the temperature should be stable, predictable, frozen solid. Instead, it started rising. Not dramatically, just a few degrees. But in Antarctica, that kind of thermal anomaly is a massive red flag. Something down there was generating heat. The team proposed explanations. An unknown volcanic vent, geothermal activity, heat from Earth's core. But none of those explanations accounted for the other phenomenon that was becoming impossible to ignore. The magnetic pulses. Every 30 seconds, like clockwork, a pulse of electromagnetic energy would surge up from the depths, disrupting radio communications and causing instruments to reset. The pulses were rhythmic, steady, mechanical. Boom, 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 like a massive clock ticking in the dark. That's not how geology works. That's not how volcanism behaves. The crew started getting nervous. They were isolated, thousands of miles from any help, standing on top of something that seemed to be waking up. The vibrations from the drill were traveling down through the ice, and whatever was below was responding to them. The lead engineer wanted to stop. He argued that the vibrations might trigger a structural collapse, that they were disturbing something that should be left alone. But headquarters was clear. Do not stop until you reach the target. They needed to know what was under that ice. What most people don't realize is that Antarctica has always been surrounded by whispers and rumors. Ancient maps from the 1500s show coastlines that shouldn't be visible under the ice. Pilots have reported seeing massive openings in the snow, structures that vanish when they circle back. But this was the first time a government had hard data, concrete proof that something was down there. They were about to knock on the front door of something that had been sealed away from the world. The drill bit was only a few hundred feet from breakthrough. The tension in the command tent was suffocating. They were about to breach a barrier that had been closed for longer than human civilization had existed. At 3 a.m., the sound changed. The low, grinding crunch became a high-pitched scream as all resistance suddenly vanished. The drill lurched forward, spinning in empty air. They had punched through the dome. Immediately, a blast of pressurized air rushed up the borehole, 2.5 miles of compressed atmosphere exploding toward the surface. It carried that smell, ozone and old metal, and something else, something that made several team members immediately nauseous. What could create that kind of sealed atmosphere beneath miles of ice? They quickly pulled the drill back and swapped the bit for a high-definition fiber optic camera equipped with floodlights and sensors. Mile by agonizing mile, they lowered the cable down. The deeper it went, the worse the interference became. The video feed flickered with static. The audio picked up that low hum, louder now, like a massive generator running somewhere in the darkness below. When the camera finally cleared the bottom of the ice sheet and entered the cavity, the room watching the monitors went completely silent. The floodlights illuminated a surface that shouldn't exist, the impossible shell. It was perfectly smooth, dark, reflective, like polished black glass or some kind of advanced titanium alloy. The surface curved away into darkness, stretching beyond the range of their lights. There were no rivets, no welding marks, no signs of assembly or construction. It was a seamless shell, one continuous piece of material that looked poured rather than built. The sensor data showed something that violated known material science. The substance was harder than industrial diamond. The laser rangefinder tried to measure the full dimensions of the cavity, but the beam just kept going. The dome wasn't a small structure. It was part of something massive, a complex that extended far beyond what they could see. The camera rotated upward, examining where the ice met the metal. That's when they noticed something that made their blood run cold. The ice hadn't frozen against the structure. There was a gap, a cushion of air between the dome and the glacier pressing down from above. The structure was repelling the ice, creating a barrier that kept millions of tons of pressure from making contact. How was that physically possible? Then the camera picked up the markings. Etched along the rim of the structure were lines, geometric patterns that were sharp and precise. They weren't Chinese characters, weren't any known alphabet or language. They looked like pure mathematics, complex geometric equations carved directly into the surface. The scientists were staring at proof of something that current historical timelines said couldn't exist. An advanced civilization, or something else entirely, that had existed at the bottom of the world long before humans walked the Earth. But the heat sensors spiked again. The temperature inside the cavity was 60 degrees warmer than the ice above, essentially room temperature. That meant one terrifying thing: the system was active. This wasn't a ruin. This wasn't an archaeological site. This was a functioning structure that had been waiting in the dark, maintaining itself for who knows how long. It was a base, and something inside it was still running. The lead scientist, a man who had built his career on rational explanations, was sweating despite the cold. He typed a message to Beijing, attaching the first clear images. Target acquired. Structure is artificial. Origin unknown. Requesting instructions. The reply came back instantly. Secure samples. Do not retreat. They wanted proof. They wanted to own whatever technology had created this impossible structure. So the team deployed a remote-controlled cutting arm, equipped with an industrial laser powerful enough to slice through tank armor. They positioned it against the outer shell and fired. The laser sparked and hissed. The black material didn't even warm up. It absorbed the energy completely, showing no damage, no scratches, nothing. The structure was effectively indestructible with their current equipment. They changed tactics. If they couldn't cut the dome itself, they'd take samples from the ice directly touching it. They figured that if this thing had been here for millions of years, the ice in contact with it might hold clues about its age and origin. They deployed a thermal scoop to extract a core sample from the interface layer, the slushy, fog-filled ice right next to the metal skin. As they winched the sample up, the cable began vibrating, not from wind or mechanical stress, but from the sample itself. The canister felt heavier than it should, as if its mass was increasing the closer it got to the surface. Magnetic readings went completely off the charts. The closer the sample came to the surface, the more the camp's electronics failed. Laptops crashed. The generator sputtered. Lights in the mess hall exploded, and the crew felt it too. A buzzing in their teeth, a metallic taste in their mouths. Some developed sudden nosebleeds. It was as if the sample was radioactive, but Geiger counters read 0. They were pulling up something that didn't follow the rules of physics. The canister broke the surface and was immediately locked into a reinforced containment unit. The team gathered around the thick glass window to examine what they'd found. What they saw inside wasn't just ice. It was moving. The living ice. Ice is supposed to be dead. Frozen water locked in crystalline structure. But the core sample inside the containment chamber was different. Cloudy, filled with swirling gray fog, and floating inside the meltwater were tiny black threads, like filaments of hair suspended in liquid. At first, they assumed it was contamination from the drill, maybe carbon scoring or mineral deposits. Then someone turned on the ultraviolet light to check for bacterial content. The moment the UV rays hit the sample, the black threads snapped to attention. They didn't drift, they swam. They coiled together like snakes, forming complex geometric patterns, twisting and reorganizing with obvious purpose and intelligence. The room erupted in shouting. This wasn't geology. This was biology, but biology that violated every rule they understood about life. Nothing survives at that depth. Nothing survives that pressure and cold for millions of years. And nothing that's been buried in darkness for eons should react to light like a living organism seeking the sun. Can life exist in forms we don't recognize? They moved quickly to analyze it, using a robotic needle to extract a drop of the water for examination under electron microscopy. The image that appeared on the screen made several of them step back from the monitor. The threads weren't cells. They looked like machines. Tiny organic machines with interlocking components that resembled gears and pistons, but made of biological material. They'd been dormant in the ice, but now they were waking up. And based on their movement patterns, they were hungry. The lead biologist ran the sample through a DNA sequencer. The machine processed for 10 minutes, then returned an error message. No match found. Unknown origin. Asterisk. He ran it again with different parameters. Same result. Genetic structure does not match any known terrestrial organism. The genetic code had 4 strands instead of 2. It was completely alien to Earth's biology, either a shadow biosphere that had evolved separately from all known life, or something that had been brought here from somewhere else. But here's what terrified them most. The sample wasn't just alive. It was showing signs of collective intelligence. When they separated drops of the contaminated water onto different slides, the threads in each drop started moving toward each other, pushing against the glass barriers, trying to merge back together. It was a hive mind, individual components trying to reunite into a larger whole. The scientists realized something horrifying. The dome below wasn't just a structure. It was a containment unit, a prison, and they had just let something out. Suddenly, hairline fractures appeared across the containment box. The glass was reinforced, bulletproof, designed to hold dangerous chemicals under pressure. But tiny cracks were spreading across every surface. The black threads were vibrating at a frequency that shattered molecular bonds in the glass. The team panicked. They tried to freeze the sample, dumping liquid nitrogen into the chamber. It didn't work. The cold just made the threads move faster, more aggressively. They clumped together into a single black mass, pulsating with an eerie purple light. One of the junior researchers, a man named Chen, was standing too close when a seal on the containment glove box failed. A tiny puff of the mist escaped, just a wisp of vapor. It touched his bare skin. He didn't scream. He just stared at his hand as the veins turned black, the infection traveling up his arm visibly beneath the skin, moving faster than blood, faster than any known pathogen. He collapsed, convulsing. His eyes rolled back, and when they returned, the whites had turned completely black. He stood up, stiff, unnatural, and when he spoke, it wasn't Chinese. It was a series of clicks and grinding sounds, the same pattern they'd been hearing in the radio interference. The entity in the ice was taking him over, and it was using him to communicate. The rest of the team backed away in horror and sealed the lab door, trapping Chen inside. But he turned and looked directly at the camera, and what they saw in that moment would haunt the survivors forever. He smiled, and his teeth were covered in the black slime. At that exact moment, the ground shook. A massive tremor hit the station, buckling the floor. The dome 2.5 miles below was reacting. It had sensed its escaped fragment. The sensors showed a massive energy spike surging up the borehole. The dome was powering up, and it was calling home. The collapse. The team leader grabbed the emergency satellite phone with shaking hands and dialed the red number, the direct line to Beijing that was only supposed to be used in catastrophic emergencies. "Containment breach," he shouted over the growing rumble. "Level 5 biohazard. We're losing the station. We need immediate evacuation." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end, cold and bureaucratic, delivered the response that froze his blood. "Initiate Protocol 0. Protocol 0 meant self-destruction. They weren't sending rescue. They were ordering him to blow the station and everyone in it to prevent whatever was happening from reaching the outside world. Before he could respond, the sealed lab door exploded outward, not from fire, but from pure kinetic force. The reinforced steel flew across the room and crushed a server rack. Chen walked out. But it wasn't Chen anymore. The black filaments had burst through his skin, forming an exoskeleton of living material. He raised one hand, and every light in the room exploded simultaneously, plunging them into darkness, except for the purple glow pulsing from his transformed body. Chaos erupted. Scientists scrambled for the exit, slipping on ice, abandoning equipment. Outside, a blizzard was burying the station in whiteout conditions. But inside, it was getting hot. The energy surging from the borehole was heating the bedrock. The ice foundation of the entire station was melting. Steam hissed from cracks in the floor. The whole base was sinking into a slushy grave. They had to choose, freeze to death in the storm or be consumed by the thing inside. They ran for the snowcats, tracked vehicles parked outside, and cranked the frozen engines, praying for ignition. Behind them, the main building of Kunlun Station began to collapse. Metal beams twisted like plastic. The heat from the borehole had become a geyser of superheated steam, shooting hundreds of feet into the air. But you can't just drive away in Antarctica. Visibility was zero. GPS was dead from the magnetic interference. They were driving blind, just aiming away from the heat signature. In the rearview mirror, the survivors saw something that would be burned into their memories forever. A beam of brilliant blue light shot up from the drill site, punching through the clouds and reaching straight into space. It wasn't just bright. It was coherent, focused, like a laser signal being broadcast to the stars. The dome wasn't just waking up. It was calling for something. The light was so intense it blinded their night vision equipment. The snow around the base turned to water instantly, creating a massive lake in the middle of the frozen continent. The station, the drill, Chen, and everything else slid into the water and disappeared. Then the shockwave hit. It lifted the multi-ton snowcats off the ground and sent them tumbling across the ice. When they finally stopped rolling and the survivors climbed out, battered and bleeding, there was only silence. The blue beam had cut off. The heat had vanished. The water had flash frozen, sealing the hole as if nothing had ever happened. Only 3 people survived. Their radiation badges were completely blackened. Lethal exposure. They knew they were walking dead, but they had one priority: a hard drive. The team leader had ripped the backup server before fleeing. It contained everything: the radar scans, the camera footage of the dome, the video of Chen's transformation. They walked for 12 hours through the blizzard until a supply plane spotted their emergency flares. When the rescue team picked them up, they handed over the drive without a word. They were flown to a military hospital in China and placed in isolation. They were told they'd suffered hallucinations from a gas leak. They were ordered to forget everything. But you can't delete data once it's out there. Someone at that hospital made a copy, and that copy eventually found its way to the internet. The warning we're ignoring. Weeks later, a grainy video appeared on obscure forums and conspiracy sites. Shaky footage showing the metallic curve of the dome and that blinding blue flash. Within hours, it was gone, scrubbed from every major platform, replaced with error messages and dead links. But the internet never truly forgets. People had downloaded it. Analysts examined every frame. They saw the impossible geometry. They saw the terror in the researchers' faces. And they started asking the questions that authorities didn't want asked. Why is Antarctica so heavily guarded? Why did all world powers, enemies and allies alike, sign a treaty agreeing never to fight there, but also never to allow unrestricted civilian exploration? It's the only place on Earth where the US, Russia, and China actively cooperate despite their conflicts everywhere else. Maybe they're not protecting the ice. Maybe they're guarding the prison. The leaked documents describe the living ice as either an ancient bioweapon or a terraforming agent. If that material gets into the ocean, it could rewrite the biology of the entire planet, and those filaments thrive in cold water. Antarctica is surrounded by the largest reservoir of cold water on Earth. If the dome released more of that material during the explosion, it's already in the ecosystem. We might have triggered a slow-motion invasion. The 3 survivors haven't been seen publicly since 2019. Their families were relocated. Their names were scrubbed from university records. Classic cleanup protocol. But the signal is still there. Amateur radio operators in South America and Australia report strange rhythmic pulses coming from the south, repeating every 42 minutes. Too slow for machinery, too fast for geological processes. It sounds like a beacon, or a countdown. China has sent 2 more expeditions to Dome A, but these aren't scientific missions. They're military convoys. They're not drilling anymore. They're building a perimeter, constructing something to contain what they unleashed. They're building a lid to keep something down. The threat beneath our feet. We always look at the sky for threats, asteroids, solar flares, alien invasions. But the terrifying truth is that the threat has been here the whole time, sleeping under our feet, buried in the cold, waiting. And we just woke it up. The discovery at Kunlun Station wasn't a scientific triumph. It was a warning shot. The dome is still down there. The ice has refrozen over the borehole, hiding it again. But satellite thermal imaging shows a constant warm spot at Dome A. Something is generating power. Something remains active. The question isn't what that dome was built for. The question is, what happens when whatever's inside decides to come to the surface? We think we're the masters of this planet, but we're just temporary tenants living on the roof. And the landlord just turned on the lights in the basement. What do you think is really under that ice? Is the government hiding an ancient civilization that predates humanity? Or is this a military experiment that went catastrophically wrong? And if that living ice is real, if it's already spreading through Antarctic waters, how long before it reaches the rest of our oceans? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to see more of the mysteries they don't want you to know about, hit that subscribe button. Because the truth is out there, buried under 2 miles of ice, waiting for the moment when it can finally break free.